Welcome to Fostering Solutions, a podcast that uplifts people and enterprises making positive impact in communities around the world. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Foster. All righty, today we are on Fostering Solutions, and my special guest is Mark Dalgety. This is the beginning of our leadership series, and I'm excited to have my old friend. I've known this guy since we were like 10, many years ago in high school in Guyana. So it's my pleasure to have Mark Dalgety on. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be invited to my old schoolmates show. You know what I mean? I think it's the first of its kind, thinking about it, considering that we were both exactly in the same class, sitting next to one another, I don't know, 50 odd years ago.
Now, don't give her age. It was not 50.
40, not 50, 40.
We got to stay young. You never share your age, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, women don't. Guys are not bothered.
Yeah, you guys don't care. Well, Mark is joining me from London. I'm based here in Charleston, West Virginia. So it's an international conversation. So Mark, tell the audience about yourself. Who is Mark Dalgety?
Well, in a nice nutshell, I would say Mark Dalgety, in brief, let's say, born in London, sent to Guyana when I was 1 year old by my parents who were studying in the United Kingdom. My dad was studying chemistry. My mom was a sociologist. Sent to Guyana when I was 1 year old and grew up with my aunt and grandma and my granddad also. I spent most of my formative years in Guyana. During the school term, I was in the urban part of the cities, and in the holiday period, I was with my grandparents, doing the things like milking cows, looking after chickens, in the rice fields, in the cane fields, swimming in the trenches and everything that, where Guyana, it could be explored in a natural format, I then returned or came to London when I don't know, I was around 20 or 19. Spent 3 years working as an independent courier, then went off to study chemical engineering, spent a year in industry, and then head back to Guyana, where I was trying to relocate and then end up with some ideas where I started my tea business. And now it's almost over 25 years or 25 years at least since I've started the business. And here I am now being interviewed by you.
Okay, wonderful. So you're in the tea business. You're the founder of a tea company, Dalgety Teas, that's based in London, which is probably, they drink more tea there probably more than any place in the world. So what or who inspired you to launch your company?
It wasn't a why or a who. To tell the truth, it was kind of like almost, I would say, a stumbled situation. Then I saw an opportunity. When I finished studying, I actually was trying to relocate to Guyana to live. And but I had a mortgage in the United Kingdom. So although I was helping my dad with a business he had down there that he was making something called sodium silicate and also putty and aquatite. He was on to having some challenges, so I went down to help him. But then I actually had a mortgage, as I said, in the UK, and was struggling to pay that mortgage. So I used to come back up to London every 6 months, do some sort of taxiing for 3 months, left the money inside of my account, and then head back to Guyana. And it was beginning to get very cumbersome. And then I realized that what I needed to do is find a product that I felt that I could make hard currency with. Somewhere along the line, when I arrived in London, I met an old Guyanese Chinese guy who asked me if I could get him some Cersei tea bush. And I asked him how much, and he said, any amount, So when he said any amount, I said, wow, and I said, well, how many packets? He said, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000,
Wow.
20. So I'm like, okay. So normally when I arrive in London, I'm normally totally flat broke. I looked at my credit card and I realized I had about in those days, it's 25 years ago, I had £1,000 available. I bought a ticket and headed straight back down to Guyana. And I went into the rural areas where my grandparents lived, and I went into the what we call the back dam in Guyana, you know, where all the farms are, and collected about £1,000 of this Cersei bush, dried it, and luckily enough, my parents weren't in the country, but I sat in the living room, and using a scissors, I cut it into 16,000 1-ounce packets.
Wow.
Shipped it back to the United Kingdom, and sold it for 50 pence each, earning about £8,000, you know. So that was a cool turnover. But then what happened is that whilst I was selling it, one day an Indian shopkeeper turned to me and said, you know, because the stuff is in packets, it wasn't like the nice packaging you see now, and said, oh, you're calling this stuff tea? Where's the tea bags? You know? And, you know, I just laughed about it, but then it just, you know, it just stuck in my head for like 2-3 days. And then as I began to, you know, on the journey, I began to realize that, by the way, this stuff in Europe that these guys are calling herbal teas is what we call bush tea in the Caribbean.
Right.
I mean, in the Caribbean,
organic stuff, right?
Yeah, in the Caribbean, I mean, you want something like, I don't know, if you got fever or so, you go and you pick some lemongrass or fever grass, as they call it, or, you know, you just go and pick the bush or the leaves and you just boil it. So then it dawned on me that, I mean, this is the same leaves and so forth, but when it's packaged into tea bags,
right,
it then becomes herbal tea, and it's also a premium product. So right there and then, I mean, my whole engineering knowledge kicked in, and I thought to myself, you know, I'm going to try and introduce these Europeans here into some herbal teas, right, from the Caribbean. But more importantly, at that time, what I found is that a lot of the herbal teas at that time was using a lot of artificial flavorings. So I thought I'll introduce them to 100% natural, strong flavored herbal teas that was from a Caribbean background with a Caribbean theme to it. So that was basically the concept of how it started.
So you used your engineering background, your science background from high school,
yes.
Your chemical engineering background, and also your entrepreneurial spirit, because I think you had to have some kind of entrepreneurial, you know, spirit in you to see the opportunity. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that is true. Actually, there's a funny situation that you might or might not remember. You know, at school, I was definitely always an entrepreneur. I used to keep a lot of these dances and parties where I had people paying to go in. And you might not remember or might remember.
Yeah, I was such a good girl. I never came to those parties. So.
Is that so? You just weren't allowed to come. But then I also used to change currency. And I could remember, if you remember, sometime in third form, I could remember one of your family came. I could remember taking US currency from you and going changing it.
Oh, I don't remember that. Wow.
I remember that because one of my first deals.
Oh. You always had that entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, entrepreneurial wasn't a big word in those days, you know what I mean, to say, but I mean, I think I was always into the wheeling and I mean, but I wouldn't call it wheeling and dealing, but always looking at opportunities to make some sort of money or, you know, some sort of profit situation, you know.
Yeah. So you kind of described where your business started. So kind of take us along that trajectory, that where you were, you know, just harvesting your herbs from the
well, I never really got into the harvesting. I mean, the thing about it is that with regards to the teas, I never really knew much about, you know, in Guyana, in the rural areas, I mean, or you go to certain markets, there's a lot of people that know about a lot of the benefits of the teas. What I was really motivated by is really the technology of taking those teas to the next level. Right. Because I mean, the teas are not new, you know, I mean, these things have been around for hundreds of years in the Caribbean and in Guyana, you know. What I've basically done is apply the modern technology to package it and keep it and maintain the naturalness, the natural nature of it, you know, but presenting it to what I call a modern day consumer.
Right.
You know, but entering the market in the UK, which, I mean, you're speaking about the trajectory, is that, I mean, 25 years ago, you didn't have Google and all these various things, you know?
Yeah.
So I just...
No Amazon,
No Amazon, no nothing, you know? So I basically used what I call a common sense approach to marketing the products, because, I mean, it was new. People were just accustomed to drinking your normal tea, your Lipton or your PG tips or what it is. It was an emerging market. I simply just went into the library. I decided I was going to target mainly the areas that had a high ethnic minority population or a migrant population, which was made up of people from the Caribbean, India, Africa, China, and so forth, who would normally be a bit more familiar with these herbal products, yeah, and at least in a loose form. So you didn't have to educate them too much about the benefits. I mean, all you had to do is present to them that this was a modern day packaging version of it. And since they were now in a fast moving consumer society, who has time to go boiling the bush and straining it and so forth, you know? And simply went into the library and worked out from the consensus book where were the high population areas with ethnic minorities. I used the same books in the library to find out where the supermarkets were, and literally put the teas into my briefcase and went from shop to shop. I mean, I broke down the London, UK into certain categories: inner London, outer London, then moved north of England, then west of England, south of England, and all the pockets that had migrant population. But that's pretty much how the brand was built. And then after about a year, in each city, I began to find wholesalers that continued selling the products to me whilst I wasn't there, right? Because before you were going to shop, if you go to shop, you're selling like a few packets at a time. Then you go to wholesale, you would buy a pallet. Then eventually, once I conquered most of that market, I then went from one distributor that covered the whole country, and then they would buy the equivalent of a container. So, I mean, that's basically how the brand, and then obviously once I built the UK market, we started venturing into various other parts of the world, other European countries, back to the Caribbean and things like that.
So where in what countries can someone buy Dalgety teas now?
Well, at the moment, I mean, apart from the UK, which obviously we have over 5,000-6,000 retail shops that sell, and obviously we also in the big supermarket chains like the Sainsbury's, Tesco, as the Walmart. Our biggest export market right now is mainly into the West Africa, where we've just set up operations in Ghana. But we've been doing, I would say, moderate sales into countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, into Europe, you know, France, the neighboring countries, Germany, occasionally Spain, Sweden. They're small, nothing like container loads, you know, but just sort of like testing the waters. We sold to America also. But those areas, and we also sold to China, interestingly. I think we won, that was many years ago, we sold teas to China and ended up getting an award because, I mean, the district that I was operating from, they were a bit puzzled how this little tea company managed to export tea to China when everybody was importing tea from China, but then we had a good unique selling point.
Right. And also the Caribbean, because you're
yes, and the Caribbean. Yeah, I did mention the Guyana and the Jamaica. Yes, that's right. That's
absolutely
right.
So you're clearly a leader, and when you think about leadership, I believe that leaders aren't born. Some people think it's some magic. No, I believe leaders are made. And that to be a leader, you kind of develop certain skills and attitudes and behaviors, which can be learned. So if you kind of reflect on your journey, what would you say are some of those skills, attitudes, and behaviors that you had to learn or adopt in order to be successful?
I think my leadership skill is I tend to be relaxed because I try to make work play. But then at the same time, I tend to be very highly focused and target driven. And I'm also a very determined person, and probably resilient is another word I would use in terms of achieving an objectives. Wow. You know, but those are some of the attributes I think, I don't know, I probably might have always had them, but then it's really just to exercise those things that you have in you, you know, and that's pretty much me, you know, in terms of, if you want to call it leadership skill, you know, but I'm always very focused on what I'm trying to do. I'm definitely resilient. I'm definitely determined. And I'm definitely target driven. But in all of it, I try to make sure I am having fun whilst I'm doing it.
That's all. That gives you balance, right? That's all.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you have a large? I know you've got to have a large team working with you to make this happen. How large is your team, and how do you manage them? What would you say is your leadership style?
Actually, I don't have a large team any longer because I had a large team, but I mean, you got to work smart in the environment that you have now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the largest team I had at one time, which is up to about 10 years ago, is basically, I think we had a factory with about 25, 30 people in it. But then I pivoted the business about 10 years ago because we were finding ourselves, I was always limited in my growth by the capacity of the machinery that I had. So what we ended up doing is basically outsourcing. I leased my whole factory to another person, business associate I had, and then he had spare capacity. And then I basically signed a contract and allowed him to start packaging a lot of our stuff for us. Okay. And so I could spend a lot more time on developing new products because I mean, what we enjoy doing, I would say I enjoy doing most is developing products and developing markets. Yeah. And I was getting tied down by the running of the factory because you got to understand, especially when you're trying to expand, you can't run the whole spectrum. And I've done everything. I mean, I've had a whole spectrum whereby, you know, I'm developing products, I've got a factory running, I've got vans on the road, I've got salesmen on the road, I'm trying to expand globally. And then it gets a bit too much sometimes, you know? So I decided to take away the manufacturing for a little while. We probably will be going back into it anyhow. Get some lighten the weight of, because the thing about expanding is also the more people you have is the more cumbersome your life could get. Right. So you know, so ideally, I mean, when you start, it sounds good like having 25, 30 people in the factory, but it's not that straightforward. You know, especially in the early days, since I mean, I never really worked that much, never really worked in corporate. So everything that I've learned in terms of managing people and managing systems is all trial and error and reading books. I mean, I've never had a coach or anything like that. So it's all pure, natural, you know, or you might hear somebody does something to deal with a matter and you say, oh, I'll try that one there, you know. Right. It was a situation that I worked for so many years in a nice corporate or environment and learned certain nice procedures or good practices, you know. I mean, I didn't even know how to employ people. I think half of the time, I mean, one of my biggest failures, I would say, or issues I've ever had is when I set up a factory in Jamaica, went with the same attitude I employed people in the UK and lost over, I don't know, £250,000, all because I employed the wrong people and didn't know how to train them properly. You know, but I mean, then I came back to the UK and literally went on a course on just how to employ people.
like on the job, like just in time training, right? Before you got to do it again. Interesting. So you haven't worked with a coach. Have you had like a mentor in your life, maybe, who's
not really? I mean, what I've had is consultants. So a lot of times, normally, if I am on to a project and I think it's a bit more than I can handle, I would bring in a specialist in a specific field. So, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, I come from, as I said, a finance background. I like to make things. So sometimes I'm bringing a consultant who might work on financial projections or something like that, you know, or someone who might say, like when we go into Africa, you might have a knowledge on the culture and things that you have to go through within a particular African market. So then you have that person come in when you're doing your due diligence and your studies in terms of that market. Or am I pulling somebody to do a research? If I'm entering a particular market, do the research on the market to let me understand where the opportunities lie. Okay. Yeah. So at different points in time, we would use consultants for things like that.
Gotcha. So what do you think, if you were to advise someone who, you know, who's interested in starting a business that's similar to yours, some kind of manufacturing or business similar to yours, What would you say are some keys to being an effective leader?
Well, leadership skills. That I'm not the best person to ask that, but I'll try and answer.
Yeah. I mean, just based on what you have learned.
I think the first thing I could say that, I mean, when you want to start a business, you definitely need to understand the product you're going to sell in the targeted market. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a number one aspect. You know, you just don't go and do something because you see somebody else doing it. You know, you have to have a unique selling point in what you're creating and understand the people who are potentially need that particular product. You know, I don't know if that wouldn't really come under what we say is a leadership scenario, but it's definitely a visionary situation.
Right. You know? Right.
I mean, the leadership situation, I think, is that it's important to also focus on your strengths and find people who have the things that you think you're weak in, bring in people with those strengths, you know. Right. It's important to do that because, I mean, there's some people who try to be jack of all trades. And as they say, jack of all trades, master of none. And then they suddenly realize that they don't have a business any longer, when they might have been better off focusing in on what they think is their best attributes and then bringing the skill set for things that they're weak on.
Okay. So what if you reflect on, you know, where you are now, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you first started Dalgety Teas?
I think I wish I knew a lot more on finance management. Because, I mean, you know, when you're an entrepreneur, you really do a lot of crazy stuff, you know. But saying that, sometimes, I mean, also having too much knowledge of financial management might make you not want to take certain risk. Right. Because sometimes if you look at a math, sometimes you're probably, I mean, you know, and the conclusion quick to tell you it's not going to work. But then what happens with the entrepreneur now, you go on the ideas, and then you bull your way through it in terms of your determination and focus, and then make it work. But then saying that once you get the business stable and you want to take it to another level, it's important to keep very close to the numbers, because the numbers is the main thing that you have to understand in growing your business. You know, and I mean, that's why sometimes there's some communities or some folks that copy people's ideas, and then you want to know how they make it successful, although they never had an idea. That's because the guy with the idea wasn't looking at the numbers, and the guy that copied him, he don't have no ideas, but he looked at the numbers, and then he ended up making a success based on just looking at the numbers, and he's just walking around looking for other people's ideas and turn it into a profitable business.
And when you say the numbers, you mean what it costs and what you
the whole maths and financial management, you know, with regards to the understanding how the engine of the business run. Because at the end of the day, you want a business to make a profit. It's not, and that's a profit, PROFIT, not you being a prophet as a prophet in the Bible. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of businessmen that are prophets, but don't make a profit. So people are there patting on their back because they made a great product, and then they don't have a business because they never made a profit.
That's right. That's powerful right there. Make a profit and not be a prophet when it comes to business.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you are selling teas in the US. So where can US listeners purchase Dalgety tea?
Well, at the moment, US listeners could purchase the teas on brownline-ent.com. But I mean, our expansion right now is that we should be in America in a proper manner by the end of October. We just set up our Dalgety USA, and by the end of this month, we have containers heading across there. So we set up our own from bottom up. We're starting to do our own distribution in the US market. So after many, many years, hopefully my US associates will see Dalgety teas properly established in the US market.
Awesome. So that's probably what's coming up next.
Yeah, and then apart from that, obviously, I mean, on our global line, which is www.dalgety.co, that is co, not com, .co. I mean, we do online sales all over the world. I mean, Russia, Japan, any place. I mean, it's a bit expensive to the US, but I mean, we have people who just want our teas and they pay for it anyhow. Yeah,
that's right. Is there a a sale that you made to a country that surprised you? Like you wonder how they heard about you?
Well, normally the likes of like when you have a mail order in the likes of Russia, I mean, that normally,
That's
so Ukraine or something like that, Iraq, then you're like, okay, where do you hear us from?
I know. It's like, how'd you hear about us?
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today. Any parting words for the audience?
Well, a good parting word is always to say, if you want to be in business, you should definitely, stay focused, be determined, be resilient, and have a good, unique selling point in whatever product or service that you want to offer. Mm-hmm. And that's an important point as any business person should have. All
righty. Thanks so much, Mark.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Great seeing you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fostering Solutions with Mark Dalgety of Dalgety Teas. This is one of the episodes in my Keys to Leadership series, and I hope you will check the other episodes out as well. Until next time, be blessed and stay safe.